So let's just kind of jump right in because Peterson here is going to kind of catch us up where Hetzel, who was the prophetic ethicist, what he was talking about. She's going to kind of catch us up, and then she's going to be very direct with regard to her concerns regarding prophetic ethics, right? So she begins this chapter by saying Peter Goodwin Hetzel, prophetic ethics, argues Christians are to bring about justice in society through the practices of faith-rooted organizing, embodied solidarity, and daily prayer. Right. And so for Hetzel, she tells us we must set our eyes on ambitious goals for the transformation of society. That's what ethics is all about, according to prophetic ethics. Right. And we must work toward these goals through loving, nonviolent means. Right. He uses the civil rights movement in the 60s as one of his illustrations. She tells us that prophetic ethics thus looks to peaceful struggles such as the American Civil Rights Movement, as I mentioned there, as inspiration for how God's people are intended to engage a larger world. And she says that she's in full agreement with Hetzel in holding that seeking God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, Matthew 6:10, means seeking a society that is structured in just ways. However, she has at least a few issues with his particular approach.
Right. I'm glad all these people are admitting to wanting a theonomistic Christian nationalism society. So this is this is an odd predicament we all find ourselves in now.
Yeah.
All right. So what are Peterson's concerns here? Well, she's got three here. So the first concern that she has is prophetic ethics presupposes a notion of social justice towards which we are to strive. But an adequate discussion of the requirements of justice must reference human nature and human flourishing. The second, prophetic ethics neglects the more local and private dimensions of ethics. And the third concern that she has is prophetic ethics practices of collective organizing and embodied solidarity are not the only appropriate responses to social justices. To social injustices. And so she's going to examine all three of these. So she's set up the balls on the tees, and now she's going to swing for the hole.
That's right. So the first one, social justice must define by reference to the human good, right? So this is her issue with regard to social justice. Doesn't have an adequate discussion of the requirements of justice, must reference human nature and human flourishing, right? What's the requirements of justice? How do we know when we've reached our goal, right? That kind of stuff. And so she says social justice must be defined by reference to the human good. That's how we know when we've reached our goal, when we've accomplished social justice, apparently, is what she's telling us, right? So she said prophetic ethics is clearly focused on bringing about a more just society, but one does not need to look far, she tells us, to see fundamental disagreements about what makes for a just society. Right. How do we know when we've got a just society, right? And so she says, thus, in the present day United States, one finds people speaking in terms of what is just and fair, while defending divergent positions regarding tax policy, public education, family law, the criminal justice system, and so forth. And so clearly, she tells us we need a way to begin to discuss what justice really is and what a just society would look like. But the requirements of a just society often cannot be discussed, she tells us, apart from questions about the essential natures of specific human activities and, more broadly, human nature and human flourishing. Now, again, this makes sense from her perspective because she's a natural law ethicist.
Mm-hmm. So she does bring up one example. I think you could bring up one, but I'll bring up hers, and then I've got maybe a better one here. So she says, turning to controversies in education in her own hometown and in many others across the United States, there is currently a heated debate about the role that standardized testing ought to play in the public school system. All parties are united in wanting good schools. But while some hold that standardized testing serves this end, others insist that frequent testing stunts childhood curiosity and incorrectly treats only a narrow range of always academic skills as worthy of cultivation. Fundamental to the debate over school testing is thus a debate over what we think about childhood and who we want our children to become. Thus, a robust account of human flourishing must inform the notion of social justice that prophetic ethics urges us to pursue. And again, this makes perfect sense from the perspective of her position, and also in wanting to respond to it. And we've kind of talked about this in other presentations. Is it seems sometimes that when we're discussing these four views, there almost seems to be kind of an eggshell encapsulation of others, and it depends on kind of where we think, or where we are going to derive our starting point. And it seems like a lot of these could be caught up within a secondary or tertiary outlook. But I was thinking she's kind of going for an easy, kind of middle of the road one. But I want to talk about abortion for this one, because I would think that maybe Hetzel has maybe a different outlook, and I don't know. I'm only guessing here, but maybe a different outlook of what human flourishing we're supposed to focus on. Now,
what does social justice, your question, I think you're getting at here, look like with regard to the abortion issue, right?
Right. And let's take everything of everyone wanting just the good thing, and not any of the political backstabbing or backbiting or anything like that, and just talk about, well, maybe there's a good case for focusing on the goodwill and flourishing of the woman, always and forever, and then always on the baby. Or how do those two intersect when they come to a head, if they do ever? And so that seems to be one where the prophetic ethics doesn't really give us an idea. And again, that's what Kellenberg was talking about, was without a why, without a foundation. Here is what she's talking about, without discussing the initial starting point of who we are, and then for Kellenberg, the end point of humanity. I think we're at an impasse here where another outside influence has to come, or we do a sensible and proper thing and have a Bible study. But that I might be showing my cards just a little bit on where I'd want to go. But I think that the what's been presented to us as the prophetic ethics viewpoint, it doesn't launch us into a profitable discussion here. We're just going to be talking about who does the most harm, or who's the most oppressed, or and at that point you're just talking about two oppressed people then, because one side's going to say the woman's more oppressed, the other side's going to say the baby's more oppressed, and then where do we go from there? So right. I think she makes a very strong point here, and I think both Peterson and Kellenberg bring this out fairly well in their presentation.
Yeah.
So
That's
school
good.
testing, very important, but also homeschool your kids. And then let's talk about abortion.
Yeah, good point. Well, and she does in the chapter give another illustration. It's not abortion. Sure. This actually is just the second illustration that she has another one. So I would suggest people need to get the book, and a little more fleshed out in terms of what her illustrations are. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that's our first issue here, right? An adequate discussion of the requirements of justice must reference human nature and human flourishing as a basis for what justice is all about. And if you don't have that, then, as you said, we're subject to all kinds of forces coming in and telling us, what direction we should go, whether they're even they could even be secular forces, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. Her second issue here is the pursuit of social justice, she says, is only one part of the human good. Not only does prophetic ethics need a natural law to inform its notion of social justice, it also needs a broader conception of the goods of human life. More specifically, she tells us, prophetic ethics needs to open itself to the more private and local aspects of the good life that a single-minded pursuit of a just society will ignore. And I think we saw something like this in Kahlenberg as well. Social justice, focus seems too limited. It's not broad enough to capture all the things that need to be captured if we're going to say we have an ethical theory, right? It's so narrow that it leaves out so much, and so that's the criticism here, right? What about private and local aspects of the good life that are left out? She says, of the single-minded pursuit of a just society. It seems to ignore these private and local aspects of the good life.
Right.
And she's going to talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah. And again, Ayn Rand has kind of put her thumb on this a little bit by saying that if you want to talking about marginalization of people, the ultimate marginalization is the one person over the collective of society. And so at that point, then everyone becomes in need of social justice for themselves, in and of themselves. And so, where does prophetic ethics then point to us? So then she goes on to say that while prophetic ethics is certainly right that the church should be working towards the realization of a more just society, each of us needs to attend to how we relate to those in our immediate circles and whatever individual projects we may be pursuing. Caring for those around us is valuable, even if it's not part of a larger social movement.
And she goes on to say that some individuals may even find themselves in situations in which it's simply not possible for them to join nonviolent movements for social change. But any ethical theory, she tells us, should still have much to say about how such individuals ought to conduct themselves. Again, she's criticizing here, saying it's too narrow. It needs to be broader in terms of its focus. She says prophetic ethics, if it is to offer a full theory of ethics, must provide a framework for recognizing that living with compassion, mercy, faith, and fortitude is always highly valuable, even if few outside one's immediate circle see the fruits of one's life and actions, right? There's still an individual aspect of ethics that needs to be lived out by the individual, even if it's not part of this broader bringing in a better social, framework for society.
Right.
In other words, she tells us it must look more like a collective quest for social justice to find the elements of a life well lived.
Yeah. And I think you see that in the early church. You see a small group of people who are they're not calling for revolution of Rome or of society. They're calling themselves to be crucified to Christ and to live that renewed life. And then in the span of 200, 300 years, they are rescuing children from the trash bins, raising them up, getting positions of power, and then overthrowing one of the greatest empires of the West. And that's all being done not through the sword or petition or revolutionary action. It's just people living out and calling people to repentance and faith. And that's an amazing thing to understand, and something that many conquering religions tend to not have at all. There's no going forth with the word that Christianity does and what they accomplish with it. All right, so the practice of prophetic ethics are not the only appropriate responses to injustice. This is her third point here. My final worry about prophetic ethics, she says, concerns what may at first blush appear to be the least objectionable and even the most inspiring aspect of prophetic ethics: its emphasis on faith-rooted organizing, embodied solidarity, and daily prayer as the practice for social change. Something that if you kind of, again, take the political nature out of these, I think we'd probably all agree that these are good kind of starting points to do in practice for it. We think about at church having a week of recognizing, praying for life and for doing it as one people, and then going and giving time or money towards funding of alternatives programs or adoption agencies and the like. So I think this is something that she's trying to say that is an agreement among pretty much everyone if we kind of take that look out. But she still has a critique here.
She says she ends here by saying, despite the success of the civil rights movement, one cannot help but wonder if the approach to social change there modeled is the only proper response for all social injustices. For instance, she gives us the illustration of Doctors Without Borders. She says that Doctors Without Borders routinely provide aid to victims of violence, right? So they are providing social justice, aid to victims of violence. But reaching such victims, she tells us, can mean refraining from criticizing and even cooperating with local regimes that may be perpetrators of violence. Well, what do we do there? What does prophetic ethics have to tell us there, right?
Yeah.
We're reaching out to the marginalized and the folks who are, that have less in society, but we're doing it in such a way, or at least they are, that they have to cooperate with the folks who are, who have captured these people, we might say. What is prophetic ethics has to say? She says, and so she ends by saying, no organization or set of practices can do everything. And the practices of prophetic ethics may well be but one set of practices among several that is necessary for addressing injustices in the world. There are other approaches. And so, again, the criticism here is it's just not quite broad enough to capture all of what our ethical obligations and responsibilities seem to be.
Right.
And to talk and to explain those to us and help us to see what we're to do in various other situations.
Right. It seems like it could lead more, a lot more to infighting rather than to go and do. So, yes.